Okay, so good afternoon. My name is Nathaniel Osgood, and I, together with Mohammed Hashabiyat here, will be the co-presenters to you of this tutorial on that introduces you to a powerful platform recently created for researching human behavior using smartphones and wearables. Today's material is going to focus on hands-on use of this platform. But I wanted to start the discussion with just a brief setting of context and motivations for the system we'll be discussing. Many of you may know some of the work that I do in applications of system science to health. Much of that work being motivated by the fact that we are, as a society and as a globe, indeed, facing the challenges of ever more complex health problems. And within this sphere, one of the biggest challenges that exist from context to context is the fact that our understanding of details of human health behavior and exposures of individuals over time, the ways in which interventions secure effect or fall flat, is often incompletely understood because of a variety of factors that are hard to measure with traditional instruments. These include aspects of people's mobility and their location over time, things that might expose them to, for example, different food environments or built environments. It includes components of their physical activity, which we know since the NHANES 3 study in the States has shown great disparities between what's self-reported by an individual and what physical measures actually pick up. Individual spatial proximity is of considerable interest in a wide variety of domains, not just transmission of pathogen, but also transmission of norms, attitudes, beliefs when it comes to health, whether it's health behaviors related to communicable diseases or related to risk factors for chronic disease. There's been a great deal of interest within the past half decade to a decade or so in the impact of social context on individuals' functioning, the ways in which the physical activity of those around us might shape our own physical activity, but also the ways in which attitudes might spread. And this aspect of social context is also difficult to measure in a less burdensome fashion with traditional instruments. Many researchers have found a rich set of focus on communicational behavior of individuals, whether it's communication about vaccination, attitudes towards vaccination, factors related to risk perception in the context of communicable disease. Health behavior in the communicational realm is of growing interest, and much of that, as we know from other SBP talks, is focused on aspects of media, not just mass media, but also social media. And then finally, aspects of people's decision-making rules and heuristics. Now, one of the big challenges in these spheres is that absent a good understanding of these behaviors, and in some cases exposures and context, the potential for quantitatively evaluating policy trade-offs using tools like agent-based modeling that are richly data-informed is really significantly impaired. And within this context, it's not just a matter of we're facing challenges in understanding this growing number of issues because of the complexity of the issues which we're facing, but societal norms for what are acceptable levels of burden associated with health data collection is changing. So our traditional recourse within the health sphere, for example, for random digit dialing to conduct large-scale health surveys is becoming increasingly unviable as people opt out of landlines, as they have increasingly sophisticated call screening mechanisms. Our ability to tap into asking questions via a traditional landline phone, as has been depended on very widely, whether it's NCHS studies or national studies conducted longitudinally by researchers, is becoming increasingly difficult. And health agencies are increasingly turning to smartphones and wearable technologies as alternative data collection mechanisms. Now, the needs within this sphere are particularly acute in a couple of areas, and much of the work that you're going to see us present in the course of the day has been motivated by the desire to address certain needs that coexist from study to study. One of them is the need to assess outcomes, whether it's patient-reported outcomes or outcomes associated with public health interventions, to assess cognitions and behaviors related to risk factors, including some that depend on context. It may be based on exposure, say exposure to a food environment, to a built environment, to a social environment. Secondly, there's a need to help theorize, support theorizing involving hypothesized generative mechanisms, to use the language of critical realism. Causal mechanisms that we hypothesize to play a role in mediating the effects of an intervention, to be able to assess that reliably. So when an intervention outcome is assessed, we know something about why it has fallen flat or how it achieved the health gains that we saw. So many of the aspects of the system that you'll be seeing about are focused on learning from different causal pathways, different generative pathways. For example, an intervention may affect physical activity at the same time altering sedentary behavior and attitudes toward in terms of education and awareness of what healthy physical activity is. And being able to tease those effects apart is often quite valuable. So supporting theorization concerning health behavior is a big motivator here. Another related factor is enhancing the degree, the speed, the reliability, and the depth of learning from interventions that may be undertaken, so that even if an intervention falls flat, it's been a success for learning. In other contexts, when we focus on individual choice behaviors, why people choose certain types of clinical pathways for their rehabilitation from an accident, or why they elect to eat certain foods versus others. We're very interested in understanding choice context. For a given individual who may be struggling with adverse food intake, what is it that is shaping their ability to change their diet? Is it the lack of contact with an environment rich in healthier foods? Is it aspects of too tumultuous a lifestyle? Is it a social environment that pushes them towards eating comfort foods with their friends? Understanding the choice context presented to individuals is of significant interest to many researchers and very burdensome to carry out with traditional written self-reports. And finally, in many studies, studies that are more exploratory, for example, involving homeless populations or individuals recently diagnosed with HIV/AIDS, individuals struggling with PTSD, struggling with challenges associated with opioid dependence. Understanding the texture of some of their daily life is also valuable. This issue of multiple pathways to effect is an important one, and it's one I'll just touch on now to give some sense of the texture, but hopefully its connection with much of the mechanisms we're going to be showing in the Ethica system will become clear. So many needs, when it comes to understanding effects of interventions, have to do with understanding these different generative pathways. So if we think about an intervention, say for individuals with PTSD, providing them a highly trained service dog, there's several particular ways in which that might affect the individuals provided with the dog. These are individuals who, as a result of having the highly trained service dogs, will be spending more time with that service dog. They'll be engaged, for example, in dog-related responsibilities, taking the dogs out for walks, and that leads to a certain degree of added structure to their life. But it also will lead that individual to spend more time outside of home, which will change their sedentary behavior and their physical activity in some ways. In other cases, it's simple companionship with the dog that is a predominant factor of the intervention, and that may change an individual's sense of companionship and and thereby reduce their sense of alienation. And yet other cases, the intervention might be mediated significantly by their social contacts with other people. They're spending more time outside their home, they're coming into more contact with individuals outside, others walking their dogs, others in the neighborhood, and it also brings them into contact with others with service dogs as part of their training. And that also affects their sense of companionship. Teasing apart the degree to which each of these different factors is shaping outcomes of great interest. For example, the sense of well-being, their sleep and the quality of their sleep, their opioid use, or risk of suicidal ideation, is a real challenge when we're only asking them questions about their behavior over the span of months, for example. If we can look using physical measures, go beyond what we can measure traditionally, we can start to, traditional is shown in gray here. Red shows what we can pick up with a sort of system that we're going to be showing today. We can pick up aspects of sedentary behavior using physical measures, same thing with physical activity. We can, using measures such as entropy of their mobility or other aspects of the behavior, we can start to quantify structure and associate with their life. Using Fitbits, joined with the Ethica data, we can pick up aspects of their sleep patterns. We can measure how much time they're spending with the dog using Bluetooth beacons, how close they are to the dog and the degree to which the dog is close to them. We can inquire for barriers for why they're not spending more time with the dogs. In short, using the sort of mechanisms we're going to be talking about today, mechanisms that leverage the wearables and smartphones that many of us carry routinely, we're going to be looking about ways for filling in our understanding about what's really going on in the effect, in the context of an intervention or in the context of an individual's daily life. And we're going to be seeing today, through detailed step-by-step walkthroughs of our system, how these particular measures can be probed using sensors, using questionnaires prompted to the individual by things like the dog not being present for a long time or being in a certain GPS region, or simply prompted in an ecological momentary assessment way according to a certain chance per hour. So today's work is going to focus on the Ethica system. The Ethica system is a third generation system for smartphone-based data collection. It runs on both Android and iPhone smartphone platforms, but it also includes a highly rich online system for conducting analysis, for defining surveys, defining studies, and monitoring the incoming data, monitoring the adherence of individuals, and conducting analyses with that system. So generally, this system is run on smartphones carried by participants that they own. In some cases, we hand out smartphones to individuals, such as homeless individuals who lack recourse to smartphones. On a frequent basis, it will measure sensors, for example, to measure where that individual is located or whether a service dog is close to them, measure their aspects of their accelerometry. And on a study-by-study specific basis, we can enable and disable sensor modalities without programming for that particular study. There's a set of modules to extend the system to monitor aspects of communicational behavior, to understand an individual's interaction with other apps, etc. And as we'll see, each study can feature its own user interface, sampling regimen for sensors, what it's picking up, questionnaires, including questionnaires with skip patterns and each issued according to certain rules and frequency triggering mechanisms. And all these mechanisms can evolve during the study. It says all but the user interface, even the user interface, in fact, in the latest versions, can be modified. And much of this without any programming whatsoever. Just to sort of wrap this up, and we'll move over to some hands-on exploration. This system is divided between apps running on the smartphone, again, iPhone, Android, on the one hand, and running on servers located externally. There's an opportunistic backhaul of information. Information is accumulating on your smartphone as long as its power makes sense from a power management standpoint for it to do so. Or if you're out of cell phone contact, it can accumulate there. And then on a periodic basis, it will be uploaded to databases where that information can be stored and browsed using the online interface. Updates made out on the web by the study creators can then be delivered to the smartphone in order to adjust aspects of the study, in order to deliver particular surveys to particular participants, or to correct problems such as typos or tone back or throttle up the frequency of surveys being issued. Okay, I think I'll turn it over to Mohammed, who is going to take us through a lot of the session today.
Yeah, thanks, Nate, for the theoretical background of the whole process. So the purpose of the workshop today is that we actually want to walk through in this 2 hours and a half that's left to create a study, collect the data, analyze it, and see how it looks like. It's a very limited time frame, especially when you consider that this type of studies is usually longitudinal studies, so you expect participants to be part of the study for at least a few days, up to a week or even more. So it was hard for us to come up with a sample study that makes sense in this context. The study that we have in mind is that we want to basically create a study that uses sensor data to capture your phone use habits, see how often during the workshop you check your phone. Well, that probably says something about how engaging the workshop is. We use the sensor data to capture that, and at the end of the workshop, we work with the data collected, we visualize it, analyze it, and so on. We also create some surveys that you can use both as a participant or as a researcher. So I'll go through this graph in details that basically specifies how it describes that how the system is structured. One thing I have to say is that first we distinguish between two different roles in the system. Either you'd interact with the system as a researcher, which then you can create the study, analyze the data, interact with participants, and monitor their adherence and so on. Or you can use the system as a participant. In that case, you're mostly using the app on your smartphone. If you're a researcher, you're mostly using the web-based dashboard. I should have said that, sorry. But if you are a participant, you're mostly using the smartphone to participate in the study. The smartphone app helps the participants to collect the data and also to answer the surveys when there's a time to do so, or do any other tasks as part of their participation. Participants also have an online account, which they can use to access their data or delete it. We can discuss that at the end. But for now, we can assume that if you are using a smartphone, your role is a participant. If you're using the web-based dashboard, your role is the researcher. Generally, a study has a timeline in our system that starts from, let me see if I have my cursor here, start from some point and ends at some point. It might go like indefinitely for surveillance studies, but we assume that there is some end date, even if it's an indefinite. We call this study duration. Participants can join anytime after the start date. If you set the start date in the future and participants join before that, the system automatically sets the start date exactly at this time. So it can't be earlier than the start date of this study. And you also define a participation period, how long each participant should be part of the study. These are usually considered the items that you go through while designing the study, how long each subject should be part of the study and providing the data. So say, for example, if you plan the study to last for 1 year, and then each participant should be part of the study for 2 weeks, you can have the rolling enrollment. You enroll participants as you basically recruit them, and then they finish 2 weeks after. During this time, the system collects sensor data continuously from the time that the participation has started to the time that it has ended. So, like for example, here you can see that it collects GPS data, Bluetooth beacon data, or any other data that you choose. This is configurable. One of these data is survey responses. That's a bit more involved than the other data sources. The other data sources are the participants don't have any active role in them. The data is collected behind the scenes. For surveys, there's either eligibility survey that's collected before the participant joins the study, because we want to see if they are eligible in the to join the study or not. And this is the only data that we capture before the participant joins the study. We don't capture any other data. And the reason is that you probably want to have some sense of who was ineligible, who was eligible, and if they were ineligible, why. So this is the data that still is collected even if they are not part of the study. But assuming they join, you can see this line, baseline survey, immediately starts after they join the study and only once for the baseline data that you want to collect. Then you have different types of surveys that you might want to trigger to participants, whether it's user-triggered surveys that can, basically user can trigger them at any time, here is shown with a circle, or scheduled trigger surveys that you define a fixed schedule, here happens at fixed intervals, like shown with X. Or contextual surveys. Contextual surveys are the surveys that you define the context under which they have to be triggered. For example, Nate mentioned about the study about service dogs. You might want, I think one of the studies that used the system was that they used Bluetooth beacon to capture participants' proximity to the service dog, and if they are not in proximity of their dog for more than 8 hours, you want to trigger them a survey. So the way that it would work is that the data from this Bluetooth beacon data source will be fed into the surveys, which then there is a logic happening here which decides whether the contextual survey should be prompted or not. I go through it a bit fast, but we will slow down and try the system as well. If you have any questions, please let me know. So we start by creating the study. Let me just create. If you go to, okay, maybe it's better if I, yeah, I can go to my own account here. If you go to ethicadata.com/dashboard, well, I do have an account here with a few studies that loads, but you can create a researcher account yourself to follow with the study. If you do create, then I will add you as the research member of this study so you can work with the data as well. So this is the first part of the system, that if you want to create a study, actually when you join, you will come to a dashboard like this, that it's empty. Mine has a few studies in it, but for you would have some sample studies. You can start creating a new study by just clicking on the Create Study button on the top left corner. If I just click here, at the first step asks me to enter a name, a consent form description, and also the institution. So this data later on will be shown to participants at different places. Let me just.
Mohammed, you might want to put up or we could spell it up. It's Ethica data, all one word. So ETHICADATA.com/dashboard.
Yes.
/dashboard.
Let me see if I can have these two side by side. Good. So whatever name and consent form you pick, it will be shown to participants at different times during the registration and while they are part of the study. You can see, for example, here, this picture shows when the participant visits the study landing page or the study home page in their smartphone, then they want to register. You can see the name of the study and the description is shown, and there is a button here that says click here to participate. It's only shown if they are visiting this web page on the browser of the phone, which if they click on it, then they can download the app, and then they will be taken to a login page, which again, in the login page, it's customized, says welcome to the Ethica, you're participating in the study. For example, here it's called Alberta Community Health Survey. And then when they log in, they are taken to the registration page, which again, they see the study name and the consent form. No data is collected from them until they press register. If they press register, that point, the registration starts, and all the steps that we have defined starts from that point. So here, I call it SBP tutorial 2018. And I did write a description here as well. Just gonna paste it here. Yeah, and the institution name. we talked about the timing of the study, like when it starts, when it ends, how long you want each subject to be part of the study. You can define these items here. I'm going to go to the next slide here. There's basically three major ones that you can, three major timing of the study that you can design. One is if it's single cohort, you want everyone to start at the same time and end at the same time as well. So in that case, here you can see that, for example, for single cohort, you set the study period from, for example, say May 15th to May 29th, and you also say the participation duration is the same as the study, so it's exactly 15 days. So everyone joins on May 15th and ends at May 29th. These dates are a bit outdated, but for example, here would be, would be, for example, July 11th to July 15th. And then everyone who joins the study, the data collection for them starts beginning of July 11th. Doesn't matter which date they join. The other one is rolling enrollment, which, as I described, they can join at any time and finish at any time. Usually in this case, the participation duration is a subset of the study period. Like, for example, here it goes from May 15 to open-ended, so indefinitely, but everyone is only part of the study for 15 days. And the third one is surveillance, which both the study end date is open-ended and the participation duration is also open-ended. So it just continues. Here, I'm just going to quickly specify, for example, from July 10th to the end of the conference, which is July 14th. So it's not open-ended. And also, this participation duration is also the same. So it's around 5 days. So here we have basically a single cohort study. For your enrollment, you can pick whether it's public, that anyone can join the study, or you have a specific set of subjects in mind that you want to invite them, and only them can join the study. In that case, you can select invitation-based. If you choose invitation-based, you have to enter the identifier for individuals who can join the study, and only them can. And the third one is closed. So then the third option, if you don't want to enroll any participant at the moment, you can set it to closed. You can change, of course, all of them later. So for now here, we just set it to public. So the third step, you pick the data sources that you want. Here, we categorize data in a few data sources. Most of them are data sources that are collected from sensors, or data sources that we call it digital footprint, data that is not through sensors but still digitally collected. The only exception would be survey responses, which people have to actively enter some data. I have entered a list of the data sources that's available. Some of them are not embedded in the smartphone. They are from wearables, for example, Bluetooth beacons. There are some, we have used a few other wearables as well, like, for example, Empathica E4, the wristband, if you're familiar with them. The system has a possibility for you to actually introduce new data sources. If, for example, there's a custom data source that you want to collect the data, there are some extra considerations there. We are not going to go through that. For now, you can, we're going to just focus on these. Not all of them are available both on Android and iPhone. That's also another fact to consider. The ones that have a star next to them, they are only available on Android, but the rest are available on both. You can see that, for example, Bluetooth is only available on Android. iPhone doesn't allow you to continuously capture Bluetooth devices around. That's the restriction in the system. Or, for example, you can record call and SMS logs in Android, but not in iPhone devices. That's why that's available only for Android. But still, for capturing participants' interactions with other participants or with any real-world object, you can use Bluetooth beacon. That's available on both Android and iPhone. The same way for digital footprint, screen state, which is the one that we are using today, tells when the participants turn off their screen or turn it on. It doesn't capture what content is done on their screen. It just says the screen was turned on, and then says the screen was turned off. That's available also both in Android and iPhone. And GPS also is on both platforms. Environmental sensors, most of the Android phones, some of the Android phones have, but no iPhone is shipped with this light or pressure sensor. They have the sensor itself, but they don't allow softwares to access it. And the other would be survey responses and battery data.
Yeah, can you linger on this just for another moment?
Sure.
Some of the
So with wearables, quite a few of them come with motion sensors, accelerometer, gyroscope, magnetometer, and any software sensors as well, like linear acceleration and so on. So for that, you can store them and still store the data. You can capture the data and still store them in the same data storage that's available for accelerometer and so on, right? So the only extension that you have to write for the application would be the plugin for the data source, if it's not available. I said, for example, we do have a plugin for Empathica E4, but for the other ones, if there's any custom variable, we have to develop that. For the ones, for example, we have had quite a few talks about the alcohol consumption sensor. That automatically measures your the alcohol level of the blood, I believe. I'm not exactly sure how it works, but for that, we would need a separate data storage as well, and the plugin to store the data. But you can expand the system by defining a custom plugin for it, and then collect the data, and then you can use any of these data sources alongside with that variable.
And so, which categories can you currently pull up in Empathica?
In the Empathica, I believe that it connects to the variable, and it can capture all the motion sensor data.
Motion.
Yes, yeah.
So for some of the physiological.
For electrodermal activity or heart rate variability, I think that their variable supports those as well, right? I believe right now it just the only component that we have to add, if it's necessary for a study, is to just store that data and upload it together with all the all the other data sources.
It may be worth just mentioning along these lines that there's sort of two modalities in which you might use these wearables in conjunction with Ethica. One is what Mohammed has talked about with a plug-in, such as for the E4, to read data off of it. And we've done some work with heart rate variability, for example, as a modality there. But beyond that, another use of wearables is something like the Fitbit, where you can actually download the Fitbit data and cross-link it to the Ethica databases. And so you basically are doing your analysis, drawing on data from the whole Ethica side joined with the Fitbit data. And that's also very viable. In fact, we're running a study with that now. There's another study over, I think, in Australia that's doing something with that. And I think you said that in Netherlands.
In UK, there's another one in UK as well that's doing the same thing. So as Nate mentioned, you can either just automatically directly connect to the variable and get the data from there and send it through our channels, or you can use the app for the variable and then link the data separately, because they have all the data are timestamped, and you can just match based on timestamp.
Was there another question, sir?
Just in general for the API, is there an API that allows me to kind of like read this data real time and push it to another software? So it's basically simultaneously stored here for later analysis, but also just to kind of like put it into context a little bit, the study we're writing right now, we're developing a transformational game for cystic fibrosis patients, and non-player characters in the game, their behavior is actually informed by how the patients are using certain treatments, like they use this vibration vest and a bunch of other stuff. So we put sensors on those things, and right now what we have is pretty much duct tape. But is there any way to essentially like read data in real time via some API from Ethica?
So yes, but depends what you define real time. So we assumed here, as Nate mentioned, the data is opportunistically uploaded. We assume that participants are not online all the time. So if there is a requirement for your study to access the data real time, you probably have to enable that continuous connectivity as well. Which that means that as soon as the data is collected, with maybe 10-15 minutes gap, it's uploaded from the phone to the servers. But as soon as it's reached the server, then it's available for real-time access. So if we don't consider the gap that the phone might need some time to upload it to the server, as soon as it arrives at the server, then it's available through a few channels. I went through the profiles, and I know that quite a few of you have technical background. We store the data in a NoSQL server called Cassandra. You can connect to that and use tools like Spark that Nate's lab has done quite a few work with Spark and Cassandra. Or you can use, we also store it in Elasticsearch that you can access it through some visualizations like Kibana, Grafana, or some other ones that we quickly demo that as well, you can see. But using those, you can access the data and read them.
Yeah, and if I could just expand on that a bit, we've explored 3 different streaming mechanisms for this data that can, as it's coming in, allow you to handle the new data items and process them as you see fit, including putting them into a different data store. If you're interested in that, I'd be glad to talk about it. It does bear noting that this choice of not counting on the user's data to be immediately available has bearing on enrollment and so on, because for some studies, particularly with lower socioeconomic status participants, they may not want you to depend on their cell data connection. They may not even have one. So there are some studies to avoid participant burden, we instead require it just to be Wi-Fi based uploads. And other studies will allow for uploads that are on the cell data connection, in which case you're typically getting data much more frequently from the participants. But that's a study by study.
We'll see that configuration at the end. So oh, sorry.
If I could just ask one
Yes,
more.
definitely.
Let me know if these drill downs are better for offline. But you mentioned Nate mentioned pulling part of the variability data off of a wearable. You developed a plugin or through the cloud connection.
Yeah, we had a student who worked in conjunction with Mohammed to investigate a couple different ways of doing this, including there was a plugin that was developed. We also used E4 software to upload it and then link it after that. So both those mechanisms were explored successfully by students.
Cool. So the plugin one I'm particularly interested in, and you could set triggers to invoke a survey based on some data threshold that's hit by the wearable.
So when I get to the surveys, I talk about I talked about 3 based on, for example, user triggered, schedule triggered, or contextual. The contextual one, some of them that we already have a well-defined schema for that, like for example, Bluetooth beacons. I quickly talk about how you can define surveys based on interactions that captured by Bluetooth beacons. The 4th one is using advanced triggering, which is basically you just write the code for that in Java, and then you specify that this is your logic. There is usually a buffer of less than an hour of data stored on the phone, so at every cycle of operation, you can pick some data, analyze it, and see based on this data, should you trigger a survey or not, and if you decide to do that, you can do it. That's how you can implement any sort of custom triggering logic. The trick there is that it only works on Android. The reason is that iOS does not allow any source code execution, remote source code execution, because everything has to be reviewed by the Apple team in advance. So that there is some technical limitations when you really go on at the edge, but there are these possibilities, of course. Okay. So for this study, we just focus on survey responses and screen states, because that's what we just wanted to capture. And also, we can collect the battery data as well. We'll see how much we get. So here in this list, I basically just go through here and just say, one of them was screen state. I select that. You can say if it's mandatory or optional. If it's optional, participants have the option to disable it via the app. But again, because it's the app, they always have the option to disable it. They simply can uninstall the app. Then everything is disabled, right? So, but here you can choose whether you want to give them the option to be able to explicitly disable one type of data and provide the other or not. Here we just say it's mandatory. If I press add, I can select also the battery and survey responses.
bears noting when Mohammed indicated that it's mandatory, there is always a button. This was one of the stipulations of many IRBs, ethics review boards, that there's a button whereby participants, when they're carrying the app, they can press the button and simply say pause data collection for a certain amount of time. So if they elect for privacy, they would do so not by disabling the sensor. Typically, they would just say, I'm on privacy for the next hour.
Yes. We talked about uploading by Wi-Fi only or using their data plan. That's also something that's very important because of the amount of data we are transferring, especially if you select, for example, motion sensor data. We collect usually like around 1,000 records or 1,200 records per minute. I think it's around 20 hertz rate. So that adds up usually, and if it might use a fair bit of their data plan. You can choose for the study to, where's my cursor, to upload data via Wi-Fi only if you choose this option. Participants still will have the option to override this regardless through the app, but this will, whatever you choose here will be the default for your study.
So when you talk about sensors, does it matter what sensors they are, or are they only sensors that are built into the phone?
When I'm talking about sensors, I usually use it as a term for referring to data sources, whatever is that data source.
Whatever that is.
Even
so
if it's survey responses, which is not even a sensor.
We use the custom, vibration and motion sensors that are connected to Arduino, but they send data to a mobile phone, and then.
Yeah, that follows the exact same. So whatever you define for it applies to all the data sources that you have, whether it's sensor, whether it's digital footprint, whether it's survey responses, whichever it is. Yeah, I incorrectly used the term sensor for all of them. I probably should use data sources, yeah. You can specify a background for the app as well. I did have at least something here. Let's see if I can still find it.
It bears noting this background is set on a study by study basis. So if you have a participant who's in more than one study,
yes,
each of them would be associated with a different background. So one in smoking might have a smoking related background, one in physical activity would have a physical activity, and they'll each in fact have a different.
Yeah, the background is shown here in this web page that's automatically created when they visit. It's used in the welcome page of the app when they open the app for the first time, and any other time that they open the app, that background will be used as the app's background. So I just use this. If I press create study here, it basically just sets up the databases in the background and creates a separate database for each of the data sources that you have defined. And yeah, now it tells us that the study is created successfully. You have selected survey responses. Do you want to define surveys right now? I'm just going to say no for now, but then we will add surveys separately.
Yeah, it bears noting that for most people in the room, if you were to go create a researcher account, which you could readily do through the Ethica website, and create a study, for the most part, you're going to want to create your surveys at the time you define the study. Mohammed is doing this for teaching reasons to avoid going into the extensive area of surveys at the moment.
Yes.
We'll come back to that.
Just one thing. So I could add basically other researchers to have same level access to the study here by just pressing add new member and then entering their email address here. I'm not sure if anyone has an account. If anyone wants, just please let me know. During the break, I'll add your name to this so you can have access to this as well.
So generally that would be for a study team. If you add a study team associated with a given study, you would have multiple people who could go and monitor the progress of the study, monitor adherence, monitor the data coming in, perform basic analyses. So you'd have a collection of people there.
Yes. So now that's pretty much it, except the survey responses that we go through it in detail later on. That's pretty much it for data collection. Now for study creation. Now we have created the study. Now we want to enroll some participants. There are 3 ways to do that. The study has a code, which for example for this one is 422, and also the URL, which is basically just the same as the code, is ethica.com/study/422, and a QR code. If I open it in a new tab page, it's the QR code for the study, which you can scan to go to the same URL. For you to invite participants, there are 3 ways to do that. You can either send them an invitation email through Ethica website. They receive an email with this link that they can tap on it to go to the study website, or they just can simply type the URL on their browser on their phone, or scanning the QR code. Eventually, they end up in this web page, which they can tap here, click here to participate. If they do that, it will take them to the Google Play or App Store to download the application, and then basically they can create an account and so on. That I talked about it in this page. They'll go through those steps. Or if they already have the app installed, they can simply press join a study, and they can enter the code. I can show, I believe I had, sorry. Yeah, for example, this is the Android simulator. You can see if they come here, they can press join study. If I type 422 here, it's fine. Here you can see the same introduction page, and describes what are the sensors being collected and so on. If I press register.
Where you could provide, for example, consent-related information.
Yes.
To allow them to make an informed choice as to whether this study is one they'd like to opt into from a privacy standpoint, from a benefit standpoint, et cetera. It also specifies the institutions involved, how long it will run, the basic terms of the study.
So, yeah, and as I mentioned, we can define some eligibility surveys for the study that participants have to pass that in order to become eligible. If there was one, they would have had to respond to that before getting to the survey. Like, for example, this one, you would have defined, are you 18 years of age or older? And yes, no, and are you a resident of Alberta? For example, these 2 would be the requirement, and they have to respond yes to both in order to be eligible. Then they would receive, they would be taken to this page where they can read about the study. And when they press register, they are part of the study. Nothing is collected before that. Now, I suggest any of you who is interested, you can go to this URL. I think I can just probably write it down here. ethica.data.com/study/422. If you go there, you can register in the study on your phone, and then we can see some of the data that as they accumulate in throughout the workshop.
So it's Ethica data, ETHICA-DATA, all
Yeah.
one word.
ETH, yeah.
ETHICA-data.com/study/422. 422.
Yes.
Yep.
So, okay, where are we? Final person.
And your screen should show something like that, and this shows information about the study with the study background that Mohammed just did.
Is it? Well, is this visible? Should I? It's a bit. Yeah. Well, let's see.
So Mohammed, one thing you could do is put it up on your screen.
My screen, but then I will go through the other sections. It might yeah.
Okay.
It's better write it down here. I try to. My handwriting is not very good. .com/study/422. Hopefully this is better. Yes, / then 422. I'll wait a couple of minutes in case that you guys want to to join as participant. Yeah, and then we can continue with it.
To be clear, they should be doing that with their phone,
Yes, yes.
not with a browser.
Yeah, you can't do it in browser, because if you do it on PC, like it shows it's still the same page on the laptop, but it doesn't give you the button to join the study, because you can't download the app on your computer.
Can I ask a quick question? How does IRB approval works with these studies? So is it possible to share the study with the IRB office or another institution?
We have put a slide at the end to talk about that. It highly depends on what kind of data sources you choose. The data sources that we have picked right now, survey responses, and for example, and screen state data, Bluetooth beacon data, these are data sources that can be completely de-identified. But if you choose data sources like GPS, that's hard to de-identify them, and more rich data sources, you can re-identify data potentially at the end. There are more concerns there. But generally, as long as you can explain that what's the privacy and security steps that you've gone through, like how you communicate the purpose of the study with the participants, who collects the data, for what reason they use it, and so on. As long as you can specify all those and describe it in the IRB, usually there is no issues.
Yeah.
Nate can talk more about it because he has gone through a few
I
IRBs.
could just mention, I mean, with Ethica itself, I think it's been used, on the order of how many studies now?
So I don't know at UOS, there are probably quite a few more in the research side, but in the outside of our research work, in the commercial side, we have used around 60 studies in Europe, Australia, and North America. In Europe, especially with GDPR, we still haven't had a problem with that. We actually have started like a few studies in the past couple of weeks there as well. So usually there hasn't been an issue.
Yeah, and its predecessors going back to about 2010, there's probably another 20, 25 studies that have gone through, and these have gone through ethics approval with various IRBs around the world. So there's lots of terms of reference, and if people are interested, I'd be glad to share documents that we've used to address questions from IRBs involving everything from communicable disease to environmental epi to patient-reported outcome studies to inpatient to chronic disease.
Any questions so far? Should we move on? So assume you have gone through all these steps and now you're part of the study. The data collection starts and continues, basically just starts immediately after the participant registers in the study and continues while all these factors are true. So the participant, as long as they have not disabled the data collection from the app, that's only for optional data sources. You can see here in this image, I'm not sure how visible it is, some switches are turned off, some are turned on. That basically they can pick and choose which data source they want to provide the data. Also, participants should not disable the data source from their phone. Of course, if they turn off GPS, they turn off GPS, there's nothing we can do. Bluetooth is one of them that they can explicitly turn it off on their phone, then we don't get beacon data. The GPS is another one. Wi-Fi is another data source that they can explicitly turn it off. They can't turn off motion sensor data. You don't have the option through settings to turn off accelerometer data. But the other one is the permission. They need to provide and grant us the required permission to access all this data, like the GPS, Bluetooth, motion sensor. If they don't grant the permission or revoke it at any time, the data collection stops until they provide the permission again. In all these cases, they will receive a notification through the app if they have disabled any of these data sources, that they should re-enable them. But still, the data collection will not happen during that time for that specific stream.
Yeah, so to be clear, if someone for a certain amount of time, say to save battery, disabled their GPS on their phone, and then they were to later re-enable it, at that point, GPS would start to be collected again. In between that time, while GPS was not available, Ethica will be collecting data on other things.
Yeah, they're mutually exclusive. Like they could be survey responses
and collecting accelerometer data, it's just that the GPS would be absent.
Correct. So, so the other thing is that whatever we have done so far, you can change it, you can modify the study, whether if you have currently participants or you don't have any participants yet. You can easily change it and update participants' devices with the latest changes. The only thing that you have to consider is that as you make modifications, if you already have participants that have finished the study or are currently part of the study, it's, well, you have to just make sure that how you want to deal with some part of the data being in the old format, some part, well, old style of the data collection, some part of them based on the new changes that you have made, and so on. Like for example, if you add or remove any survey questions, if you add or remove some sensor data. But you can basically just make any changes that's necessary. And we will go through it. You will see that when we add the surveys to the study, we can send an update to all those who have participated in the study, and they receive a notification on their phone that they have to update their studies. And there are two ways you can do it. You basically can send it through push notifications, the same way that the notification pops up on your phone and says, well, please press here to update it. Or they can go to the app and press update studies. Before the break, I'll try to go through the surveys as well and some methods for the adherence monitoring. And after the break, we can go through the data. We'll see how much data we have collected through the workshop, and also we can test some of the sample studies that we have, and we can we can play with the data from there. So I talked about the eligibility survey, the baseline survey. I talked about these two. And I mentioned that the eligibility basically determines whether the participant is eligible to join the study or not, and the baseline is only asked once at the beginning of the study. The EMAs, they can be either user-triggered, which initiate participants, or scheduled or proximity or advanced trigger. We talked about those as well. The last one that I didn't mention is exit survey. If they want to drop out of the study, they will be prompted at that point. So if you want to capture what was the reason that they decided to drop out of the study, you can use this one. So here is it. Like I'm gonna go through the website. In the menu here, SBP tutorial 2018, and the design, there's basics that basically some of the study timeline that we have specified. There's data sources, that these 3 data sources that we have defined. You can, of course, add more from here. For example, if you want to add GPS to the list as well, or any other data source. Or you can come to surveys if you want to add a new survey. I'll start by pressing add a new survey. It takes me to the survey editor here. I can pick whether it's eligibility, baseline, or generic survey, which is basically an EMA. You can also specify when the survey should expire. The thing with the EMAs is that they're continuously prompted, and you can't have more than one at the same time for a given participant. So for example, you want to ask participants, for example, 3 times a day for a specific question. You need to make sure the first one expires before the second one is triggered. Otherwise, they would have a pile of survey at the end of the day to go through. So here, for example, we set it to be, say, 15 minutes they have before it expires. And we say that as user triggered because we will add one user triggered survey. We say ask a question. If you guys have any questions, it was very quiet, you can submit it through this method. That's probably a better way. So here we define, well, it's like any other survey editor. You can just add survey pages, questions, and so on. Here I'm going to go to the questions one here, and I'm just going to add one audio text question. Here it is. And the content is, please type or record your question. We will answer it before the end of the workshop. So if you have any questions, you can use this method. Yeah, and we set it here as user triggered. I'll go through the schedule triggered and the rest as well. But this is one of the surveys that we have defined. You can also choose to capture location here.
So to be clear, user triggered here would mean they'd be triggered through pressing a button.
Yes, I will show it here. Yeah, like here you can see on the left side on the interface on iPhone, and on the right side on Android, you can see a button will be shown to the user that they can tap on it at any time. The title for the button will be whatever caption you have entered here. Ask a question. I'm going to also add this to the survey name, which if they tap it, it starts that survey. Okay. There are a few options here as well. For example, you can choose to capture location. That's different than GPS data source, because GPS data source continuously captures GPS data, while if you choose capture location, it only captures the location when they are responding that surveys. Sometimes for like if you don't want to continue to have continuous location from participants, you can simply say capture location when the survey is being responded. Just gonna publish this. And also ask me, do you want to update the participants, the current participants with the changes? So we're going to do that right now. I make a few more changes and then I will choose to publish all of them at the same time. Going back. So that was with the user trigger. The other one is the schedule trigger. The same as user trigger. The difference is that they don't get a button on the they don't get a button on the user interface of the application. But based on the schedule that you define, the survey is prompted at the time that you just specified. It's very similar to just you can think of it as like the same way that you can set a schedule in your Google Calendar, and you can say it to be repeated as well. Something very similar to that. You can specify an interval or just a specific point, and you can say issue it at that point. For example, here, and the points are relative to the participation date. For example, here is one day after they join from 9 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. Pick the time randomly with the uniform distribution, and then repeat it with this repetition schedule. And it shows an example here. For example, if they join based on this schedule, if they join on July 5th, they'll receive it on July 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and so on. I'm just going to create one survey here as well. So let's say that I want to add a survey. This time is also going to be expiring after 15 minutes. This is going to be a feedback survey. We want to ask you guys, so what do you think about the workshop? I'm going to add one question. Has the workshop been helpful so far? Yes. No. It's very quick. And also you can add schedule trigger. Say for example, we want to, this starts from day 1, but like basic day 1 is the second participation date because, well, we designed it as engineers, we start from day 0. So it's not the day 1. No, but the real reason is that day 0 is the day that they join and it's not a complete date. So you can't say from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. because if a participant joins at 11, they basically have missed that survey. So that's why we start from day 0, which day 0 refers to the day that they join and it's not a full date. So you have to consider that. I specified here day 0, and this time, what's the time right now? 1:14. Say we want to have it from 13:30 to day 0 at 14. And don't repeat, we just only want to have it once. That's why you see one example is, for example, if they join at 1:12 p.m., they might receive it at 1:30 p.m. Yes, 1:30 p.m. Today at 1:30 p.m. So I can confirm it. The other thing is that you can add as many as you want. Like I can go with another one. I can say day 0 from 14 to day 0, 14:30, which will be 2:21 p.m. for example. And then I can add another one as well. 14:30 to 15. So every half an hour it asks you, what do you think? it can give you an example schedule as well. So for example, if you join at noon today, at midnight, you get at 1:38, 2:09, and 2:57. So a random time there. You could have specified start and end to be the same, then it would be exactly at the same time. Okay, dismiss this. We have specified. You can say capture location with this as well. That's pretty much it. Okay, I'm going to publish this as well. Say yes. Okay. So if any of you are part of the study, you should receive a notification on your phone that there is an update. If not, just go to home screen, reopen the app. You should get a notification with the changes. Any questions so far? Okay, sorry. Before I go to the next one.
Can you put us on the study team as well so we can follow?
Yes. So let me, for that I need to have your email address, but
what I could do, Mohammed, to spare you having to do this while presenting, they could send me a request and I could add you. So all you need to do, Mohammed, is add me as a researcher, and then I can add them.
I actually have them. I have because I don't want it to be captured as while the screen you are doing the screen recorder. I don't want any email address to be captured there.
Right.
I'm just gonna do it here on the other screen that's not part of the screen recording. I will do it here right now. So far we only have one email address from Samir, and that's who is registered as a researcher. We have a few more, but those are participants. I can't add a participant. If you want to be added, you have to create another account as a researcher, so I can add you as a researcher.
So to be clear here, they would go to ethicadata.com/dashboard.
Yes.
And they could sign up. You say sign up, and you have a choice when signing up to sign up as a researcher or as a participant. And you'll use separate email addresses for each of those, so that you have one email address as a participant, one email address as a researcher.
Yes.
So if you want to be added as to see the data, to potentially modify this study or what have you, you'll need to be registered as a researcher. Do you want to show in an incognito window that page where they sign
Yes,
up?
I can do that. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Let me.
Is there a way to now opt out of the study to enroll as a researcher?
If you already have created an account with the app, then your account is already a participant. The system thinks you're a participant, and there is no way through the dashboard for you to switch your account. You didn't want your participant to have an option say, from now on I'm the researcher, right? That's why there's no way to do that unless you actually ask us, so we can just go and flip the switch on the back end. It's probably easier because I might mess up something here and during the demo. It's probably easier if you just create a new account here. I will show you how. If I open an incognito window, it's opening it here. Just give me a second. I'll bring this here. If you go to Ethica data, it's not typing there. Here, ethicadata.com/dashboard. Dashboard. You basically can say sign up, and then here you can enter your name, institution name. I'm a researcher, and then that's pretty much it. You can create an account here this way.
My only hesitancy is that I use my institutional email address, and now.
If you can just use another email address right now, at the end I'll do the switch, because for the switch I have to go back to console and write a few commands, and doing it during a demo, it's
Fair enough.
yeah, it might bore some people.
Yeah. So to be clear, to use this, if you want to have on the one hand a participant account, on the other hand a researcher account, you'll need to go here and create two different accounts with two different email addresses.
Yes. Yes. So even if you have already used your institution email address for the participant account, we can do the switch after that. Right now, use just another one. Let's keep it simple. It always helps. I added a couple of more who just registered as a researcher as well. Yeah, so if you yes.
Anyone who would register for this system would get information basically.
Well,
Like you would see in the list of researchers, although we have registered for the tool, but not for the
no. I actually explicitly add you right now here from a different window because I'm doing a screen capture here. And I don't. Well, the only way that it works is that you have to go here, like for example, me as a study owner, I have to come here and say I want to add a new member to my research team, and it tells me enter your email address of this person, and I would, for example, enter your email address here.
How did you get my email?
I'll mention that. Yeah. I have another page open that I don't do a screen capture on that, so your email will not be recorded there. Yeah, that's how your name appears there. I have exactly the same page open in this screen as well. And so, if you want, I can remove you.
No, you're good. I was just wondering, the reason is because I know I registered for the tool, but I did not click on that.
Yeah. So
button.
I
was surprised.
I assumed that you probably wouldn't mind being part of this study.
That's okay. That's very good.
Yeah, but because I didn't want to explicitly type your email address
That's
here,
fine.
I did it through a different window here. That's why you guys didn't see it. Yeah, sorry for that. I probably should have been more explicit about it.
That's
Yes.
fine.
Yeah. But otherwise, actually, right now here, what I'm doing, I'm just searching for who is just signing up, another person as well. So I'm just gonna basically go here and type his email address and add it as a researcher. Now, if I just go, you see another email appears here. If I just go, yes, the fourth one here as well.
Participant who joined recently.
Yes, yeah. Otherwise, no, it's not that names just appear randomly there. I have another window down here, yes. That's not visible. Yeah. Good. Where were we? Okay. So we created these two types of surveys. I really wanted to demo the Bluetooth beacons as well because I think it's very interesting, but because the time is limited, I thought actually it would be a lot more tricky to set it up in this limited time. But I explained how it works and how you can set up a survey. For beacons, you might be familiar with them. There are two technologies. You can either use iBeacon or Eddystone. iBeacon is introduced by Apple for iPhone. And because it's Android is open source, most Android devices also support iBeacon. Eddystone is introduced by Google, but it's not supported by Apple, so it's a bit more restrictive. We are using iBeacon that's supported both Android and by Android and iPhone devices. iBeacon basically constantly, I don't have a beacon unfortunately with me, but they are coin-sized devices if you have seen them, and they usually operate on a coin battery for like 6 months to a year. What they do is that they continuously broadcast three numbers. One, a unique identifier, the 128-bit identifier. The other one is a major and minor value, which is basically two integer values. I think the value is 16-bit each. So they constantly broadcast that. Now, for us to be able to use that for survey triggering, the way that we have implemented that is that you can break these two values into three pieces of information: the team, the role, and the subject. So basically, for every beacon, you have to specify what is the team for this beacon, what is the role of it, and what is the ID within that team and role combination. Right? And these are optional. If you don't have a team, doesn't matter. Then everyone will be part of the team 0. But then you can have role and subject. Basically, having these three levels of classification allows you to classify a network graph like this into, for example, team 1, team 2, and team 3. And within each team, you will have specified roles. For example, here we have red, blue, and green. And that would be each of your role. For example, team 1 role green or team 2 role green. And within each role, you have one or more subjects that you can assign an ID to. There are a few examples on the website at how you can use this for triggering the surveys. A couple of them that I can talk about. One of them is a study that we did where participants were enrolled as families, basically parent, father, mother, and one or more of their children. and they wanted to recruit something around 200 different families in the study. So each family would serve as a team, so they would have a separate ID. Whether in that team you are the father or you're the mother or you're one of the children, you would have a separate role. And then whether you are the first child or second child and so on, you would get a different subject ID, right? But you, for example, for mother and father, you would only have one. You would only have one of each, right? Or for the parent, even if they are, for example, both fathers or both mothers.
And similarly, this might be for the studies we do on the healthcare service delivery, you might have teams of different medical professionals. For example, a physiotherapist, an occupational therapist, rehab doctor, etc., each associated with a patient. And so you'd have different roles, each associated with a team for a specific patient.
Yeah. There are a lot of, like I can talk for more than a few hours about this. Like there are a couple of other designs that you can go with. For example, you can give non-participants a beacon and participants only carry a phone. You can have participants carrying a beacon and phone and non-participants also having a beacon, or you can have only beacons for participants and not include non-participants. For example, the study that Nate talked about service dogs, dogs of course are not study participants. You don't want to give a dog a phone, right? It would be cool, but not for the study. So the way that you can do it is that you can create a beacon for, you can program a beacon for every dog, and then
put it on their collar.
put it on the collar, and then they will not be study participants, but they will have the team role ID and subject ID, which will be captured and recognized by their participant team member. So the individual here, for example, the veteran would have the app installed on their phone and would be team 1, and the individual's dog would be a separate role but still part of team 1.
How do you collect the data off of that beacon if it's on a dog? So does the dog, do you physically have to have the dog come back and then scan that beacon like within a, I don't know, 5 feet?
It continuously gets captured. The same way that, for example, the phone captures GPS data periodically, captures and looks for Bluetooth beacons in proximity as well. And when it sees a beacon, it checks first, is this beacon for my study? And if it is, what is their team ID, what is their role ID, what is their subject ID, and collects that. So then based on that, creates a network graph like this. The same way that you notice that we created a survey that has user triggered and proximity triggered and schedule triggered, you can also define a set of rules that based on those rules you can trigger a survey for based on the beacon data. For example, you can say only trigger the survey if I see someone from my own team or from team number X or from any team where their role is this and my role is this, and for example we have been in contact for this period or we just departed. For example, we met for an hour and departed for half an hour, then they get the survey after the departure, not after arrival. And you can put some criteria on signal strength as well. Like for example, you can say the signal strength has to be at least -60. That roughly, basically you can infer the distance from that, how close the contact has to be. And you can define a set of these requirements, and based on that the survey will be triggered.
And to be clear here, as Mohammed indicated earlier, if you are interested in tracking not egocentric networks, of each person with particular people with whom they're in contact, but rather sociometric sort of context where you have people mixing with each other and you just want to understand the network structure among the participants, everyone could be part of the same team, have the same role, for example.
Yes.
And it will be tracking all those different contexts dynamically.
Just to quickly go through a couple of other items to mention here. That's more related to how to create the survey itself, survey content. There are some question types that, like any other survey tool, like for example, single choice, multiple choice, free-form text, or image, audio, video. One of the things that makes this survey tool different, and because of the context of the way that's presented, is that here survey, we use it as a way to deliver interventions. What that means is that in addition to these question types, you can also have cognitive tasks that's created and implemented in HTML and JavaScript. You can write that task specifically, whatever that is that you have in mind. Say it's a psychological game that they have to play a few times a day or on regular interval, and you can include that as part of your survey. I have, for example, this is an example of a go/no-go task that measures participant reaction time that's embedded in a survey. And it's a user-triggered survey, so if I press Start Survey button here, it gives me the instruction and says, in the next page, you will be presented by a sequence of 20 circles and squares. Please tap on the circle and don't tap on square. So if I press Next, this is an HTML page that loads and tells me that press Start. If I start with circle, I type click, 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 click. Well, I don't click here, I click, click. So, and at the end, like in the back end, it just measures all of my interactions and uploads them as the response to this particular question, which would be different than, for example, response to a single choice question, which is yes, no, or whatever option there. It's a complex JSON object, which you can get as the response. So this is my response to this. If I submit it, basically that's the response that's submitted.
How is how well is the timing captured on those kinds of tasks? Some things like Qualtrics or that kind of thing.
So it depends what you mean by timing. So if the timing is what, for example, Qualtrics measures, you can measure whatever timing is used. For example, in the task that you saw, the timings are randomly generated, anything between 300 to 500 milliseconds. For every cycle, it generates a random number and it stores it because you custom develop the logic of that question, whatever that is. The development for that question was that drawing a random number from 300 to 500 and then use that as a time to present that circle or square. So that number is stored as a timing number for the response for every shape that's presented. The timing that it took for the participant to complete the task, the timing that when the participant started, when it ended, and all of those timings are stored as well. Another important thing is that with these cognitive tasks, it's important that the delay and the screen size is very important usually to the researchers. So some researchers decide to actually hand out phones to participants simply because if they use their own phones, then it's not the equal user interface that each receive. Some might have a smaller phone, then the screen will be smaller. Some might have a larger phone. Still, you might decide to go with participants' own phones and then hope that with a larger sample size, you can account for these variations, but depends on the study design.
Just because it relates to Ariel's question there, one thing that Ethica had put into place from the start is a good ability to record for a given question and for a survey as a whole, how long it took someone to fill it out. And that's putting aside this particular psychological testing where you're doing very precise timing tests, but rather stepping back and just asking about surveys in general. One of the key pieces of information Ethica does capture is the timing associated with particular questions and how long it took for that person to answer that question and how long it took for them to complete the entire survey, which can be of significance, particularly in choice theory type context where you want to know how long did someone dwell on this? How seriously did they really think about this question, or were they just trying to rip through it, for example? So that is part of the standard survey information collected via Ethica. Yeah.
Yes.
So just a quick question to follow up for So for the timing, and I might have missed this because I came a little late. The timing, is that entirely phone specific in terms of accuracy?
So we store the times in UTC, and then we also store the participant's time zone, and then we present everything converted based on that time zone. So yes, that will be based on the participant's smartphone time. We assume it's correct. There has been cases that it has not been correct, but usually it's not the case because usually the people's time, phone's time is correct usually, or we hope so.
Well, more so what I'm thinking about is, say on bring the desktop hardware accelerated versus CPU time, right? So where
Oh yeah, I see what yeah. Well, no, we use the clock time. Like we use the clock time. If the time is not relative to the boot time of the hardware, if that's what you're referring to, use the clock time. Does that answer your question?
Well, I think it answers that it's an OS level time versus hardware accelerated.
Yes, it's OS level time mechanism. Yes. And when you're programming at on a smartphone, for Android you have more flexibility on what you want to do, because worst case scenario you can just compile your own version of the OS and ship it on the phones, right? But with iOS it's very limited. There's a set of APIs that you can use, even if you try to really trick them, because there's a human review team that goes through the code. You really have to abide whatever requirements they have. So yeah, we just use the standard API that they provide. Apple has a platform called ResearchKit, if you're familiar with. They also offer quite a few of these features, but the thing with there is that you have to program it. You have to implement it, and then you will get a solution for iPhone. You have to implement the same thing for Android and also the backend for that as well. But still, you cannot use non-documented API. Yeah.
Sorry, one more question.
Yes.
On this. So yeah, you mentioned that these are both the questions can be used both for stimulus presentation and for asking questions as part of the survey. Something like an animated GIF, is that handled under image or video? If it's used as a stimulus, let's say.
So let me go back to here. If we go to surveys and as a question, for example, here, if I start editing this, as part of the question, I can include videos or images as well. Like I can include a video link here. Video has to be hosted in YouTube, but it doesn't have to be public. Even if it's unlisted, we still can access it. So if, you can upload the video there and it shows it here. Or you can upload an image here. You basically select an image, which can be an animated GIF. And then when they see that, like for example here, you can see that there are two images here. These are basically just the normal JPEGs, but it can be an animated GIF, then it shows that GIF here. Or it could be a YouTube video, then it would show a video player here, which they can click on it to see the video. If it's a video, all the interactions with the video is captured. For example, they say, the participant saw this video four times, from this time to this time, from this time to this time. And like for example, whether they watch the video from start to the end, or they watch only for the first 10 seconds, and so on. All the media interactions are also captured.
And when is the video started on the time it hits the page, or do they?
The video that is not automatically started. It just shows a thumbnail of the video here, which you can tap on it, and it opens a full screen video player that shows the video, and then when it finishes, it goes back to the question. And from what time it starts the playback, it depends on what URL you include here. If you can, in YouTube URLs, you can specify what time the playback should start. It just respects that.
And so for an animated GIF as well,
I don't think with animated GIF you can specify the start frame.
oh, well, not necessarily start frame, but whether or not it starts on page landing or on.
I can't remember how it behaves if you put an animated GIF. If I'm supposed to guess, I would say that it doesn't play until you tap on it, so it opens it in full screen and then starts the playback. I have to try. I can't.
And that tap would be required.
Yes, that they have used the video, the image in full screen.
Cool, thank you.
Yes.
Mohammed, just to help put that in context, maybe you could go back. You had a slide up. Yeah, no, is that one? These are different question types, and we need to delineate. The questions here were about having the pages of the survey show audiovisual content. So things like animated GIFs or YouTube videos and so on. In addition to those, there are also mechanisms to allow the participant to record photos, record videos, and that's a separate mechanism. So some are part of the survey content that are shown to the participant. Some can be part of the participant's responses to the survey. For example, take a photo of a barrier to physical activity in your neighborhood, or if you're considering audio, for example, you might allow them to give a free-form answer, a narrative answer, either in text or audio, so that if someone finds it troublesome to type, they have the option of giving an audio answer or to record a video that's then submitted. So those are two different ways in which audiovisual contents occur in surveys. One, to show the user something. Two, to allow the user to submit rich content.
So we talked about the cognitive tasks that they might use. The second one is that you can present participants with a visualization of the sensor data from that they have provided themselves. This is some work in progress that we're working on. I will demo it at the end of the workshop. That might be a reason for you to stay a bit longer. So we'll talk about that a bit later. For a skip pattern and for criteria, the way that we are handling it is basically you can refer to any question throughout the study from any other survey, not necessarily from the survey that you are working on, for example, from baseline survey or previous experience sampling responses. You can refer to those questions by using this pattern. You can say Q survey ID underscore question ID. For example, to refer to question 12 of survey 164, you write Q164 underscore 12. And then you can use that in a conditional expression. Same way that you have in front of if, or if you're familiar with programming languages. You can write it like this. And so this is evaluated, this expression is evaluated to true or false. And based on that, whether an action happens or it doesn't happen. Where you can use it to enable or disable a specific survey. For example, you can say, I have, in my study, I have this survey for male participants and this survey for female participants. In the baseline, you can ask about the gender, and then you can define a criteria like this for every survey that's for male and female, and the system automatically filters that which of them has to be presented. You can also use it for branching. You can assign this to every, like if I come here, you can see a criteria. If I select the page, it has to be the page. Yes, I was choosing the, I had chosen the question here. The question was highlighted. If I choose the page, in the page properties here, you can just type down whatever the criteria is, question 12 underscore, sorry, 164 underscore 12 equals 2. You can benefit from a better user interface here. It's a very small box, so hopefully we can improve it soon. But yeah, basically that will be the criteria under which that page will be displayed.
So it's very common, for example, to have pages for questions which are conditional on earlier question answers, and those pages would never be seen by the participant unless they answered things in a certain way.
Yeah. There are a lot of other details we can go through as well, like for example how you can loop a page based on a question response, or based on all the options that they have not chosen in the previous question, and all these details, but I'm not going to go through those. The other way that you can use this reference to previous questions is that you can populate the question's last response in the content of the current question. If you want to dynamically, dynamically complete the content of a question. An example of it is here. Well, one thing I probably have to say before is that surveys are actually presented in JSON. If you are familiar with the format, doesn't matter if you download the file and modify it in text editor, or you use this graphical user interface to create it. Behind the scene, it just creates a JSON. Here, for example, you can see that question content says, which of the following steps are you going to take towards your social goal of? Then response for question 2192 underscore 6. Then how it's rendered by the application is, which of the following steps are you going to take towards your social goal of making a new friend by going to events you are interested in? Because that's the response they have chosen previously.
So in other words, it's substituting in the person's response from a previous question to complete the wording of this question.
Yeah. I'm just going to go a bit faster because I want to have a break and also go through the visualizations and have more time to work on the visualizations, and in case that there's any questions. The only other thing I want to talk about surveys is that you can use this to make personalized surveys as well. Because the same way that, for example, we had surveys for example, male or female, you can have surveys for any subset of participants, or even if the subset is a sample of one, if only there's one individual that would receive that survey. And you just assign a criteria to that, and the system disables or enables that survey for that individual. And A couple of slides on how you can do adherence monitoring. I'm gonna go back here. I'm gonna discard anything we have made here to this survey. Yes. So this was all about the design. For participation, you can, if you go to adherence tab page, you see all the participants who are part of the study and how much data they have provided so far. When they joined, when is their last date? You see that all of them are set July 14th, midnight Eastern time. And when was the last time they uploaded some data? User 5639, you have not uploaded any data. So just the FYI. You can see, if you extend it, you can see the device that they are using and also how long it's been in operation. Let's see. For example, this person had one submitted survey and no canceled and no expired. So it gives you a quick overview. Of course, it's because this event plot is either based on hour, day, or week resolution, depending on how long of the study is passed. But because it's been less than an hour that our study has started, it just shows one big block. If we go to one other study here, one of the sample studies is study 73. That's been going on for 4 years now. There's a fair bit of data there. If I come here, you can see that there are a few participants here. For example, participant 1 has 2,900 expired survey, 1,100 responded surveys, and you can see that each of them here is 1 week because of this, the duration of the study. And you can see that, for example, accelerometry data, this is how much is provided from each of these devices, GPS data, Bluetooth data, and so on.
So a very important here is that a given participant can have more than one device. So they may be sometimes carrying a tablet, other times a phone, or they may switch phones in the midst of the study. This one has been running for how many years, you said?
It starts from 2014, almost 4 years now.
Yeah, so over the course of that time, this participant probably switched phones. And it's capturing information for that participant from those different phones at different times.
So the other way is that to do a quality control on the data, one factor that is really important is the quantity of the data, how much data you're receiving at what frequency. To plot this, you can just go to the data quantity report page here. You can, for example, choose a participant. Say, let's see, I had chosen one that. So for 231, for participant 231, say for example, we want to see how much Bluetooth data they have provided, how much GPS, and say for example survey responses as well. I explicitly pick these ones because for data quantity matters which data source you're working on. For example, for Bluetooth beacons, it's unlikely that you are in proximity of 600 Bluetooth devices at any given time. So it's not that you're gonna get 600 Bluetooth readings per hour. It's usually anything between maybe 20 or 30 to 100. But GPS reading, likely you're gonna get a few hundred, 600, 700, or up to 1,000 per hour. While survey responses, I hope that you haven't asked for 1,000 responses per hour. So it's not that you get as many. So I picked this, and I also say I want the dates to be, I believe we tested it and we checked these dates, say for example from 1st to 8th, and resolution I say should be day. Yeah, you can see that these are a number of, there's no Bluetooth devices. It's which day that I had picked for that one that had the Bluetooth. Yeah, anyway, so all the responses are expired here. You can see that, for example, for participant 2031 survey responses on April 1st, April 2nd, all their survey responses are expired. Well, apparently the person wasn't very compliant. Probably he was in a conference or something. So, Yeah, but for example, GPS data, you can see that every day we're collecting around 12K records. For Bluetooth, we didn't have any in this period, but it would be a shorter number. One other thing that's the last one that about for the data adherence monitoring is the survey triggering schedule. Some of the survey triggering schedules that we talked about, there is no way to know in advance when we should expect them. If it's user triggered, you don't know when you expect the participant to respond it, or if it's proximity triggered. But if it's a schedule trigger, there is a specific schedule for that that's supposed to be issued. The system actually reports this schedule ahead of time. Like if I come to our study here and go to survey sessions, I can select that for all of the participants here, for this feedback survey, which was the scheduled trigger one, say for example from July 10th, show all of the schedules that they are supposed to receive. We only asked 3, right? At 1:30 to 2, 2 to 2:30, and 2:30 to 3. It shows the surveys that they have received, each of these participants. For example, this individual received at 1:36 and responded 3 minutes after, while these 2 at 2:20 and 2:52 are not prompted yet. And the same with this participant that received at 3:37 and answered a minute after. So you can have like a snapshot of when each participant is expected to get the survey and whether they have responded, it's expired, or what has happened to it. Yeah, this is, for example, a sample of that some of them are expired, that are shown in red. The green ones are the ones that are scheduled and responded, and percentages aggregate data over a given participant or a given day across all participants, or for all participants for all dates. Yeah, I think that's, can have like a 5-minute break, or maybe you can start at 2 again and go through some of the visualizations. Thank you.
In the meantime, if anyone wants to be added, so you.
I imagine it's over here.
I think there is a.
Oh, on there?
No. It's a secret. But I don't know which one is the. Oh, these are the lights, I believe.
Okay, so maybe it's inches 2, 3, 4.
Go down to 4.
Oh yeah, let's start getting.
There we go.
Okay. That is a 3.
That's
Four.
good to know for the next session.
No? Okay, I think 3 might be pretty good.
I think just
So, was there anyone outside?
Yeah, there were. I told them we were going to be restarting. They're sitting there, so I think they're trying to wrap up the conversation.
Okay, so you give them 1 more minute and then we start.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I think it's helpful if.
So I just got a question from Samir that maybe I'll address. This will let them know that we're starting too.
Yeah.
There was a question about the data that you folks have seen, you're going to see visualized. That data can be accessed via a couple mechanisms. Mohammed here is going to concentrate on ones that allow you to get started quickly with built-in visualizations of certain sorts and with very flexible visualization using a tool called Kibana, which is similar to a tool you might be familiar with, Tableau. Kibana and Tableau sort of have a similar metaphor for visualizing data in flexible forms. Beyond that, Mohammed will show how you can download data to analyze in your tool of choice, R, SAS, whatever, Gephi for networks, etc. There's further mechanism to connect directly to Cassandra-based data sources for more sophisticated analysis with Spark and tools which tap into the data source in a more direct way, which if people are interested, they can talk with me about afterwards.
Can Aura pull data from these?
I'm sorry?
Aura?
Okay, good question. So Aura, what I know about it, which is, I took a tutorial on it in SBP last year. I believe the data that can be downloaded from here could be easily wrangled in a way to put it
It's a
into Aura.
JSON XML.
Yeah, yeah. So downloading here is via CSV and JSON when you download directly from the tables. And that could be wrangled into a form that Aura should be able to take it. Yeah, yeah. For network data
Yes, for network.
and both relational and scalar attributed data. Yeah.
Okay, so Nate gave a short intro of data visualization. There are 3 types of the visualization that we support. One is that if you there's some simple tools on the website that you can use to visualize the data. We look at some of them. They are only for GPS data and for survey responses that you can check them through the website. The other option is that if you want to download the data in the few formats I supported and then use it in some other tools like Aura that you mentioned or any other tool that you want to use for visualization. There's actually 4. I thought it's 3. The third one is that if you want to connect to the data through an API and then read that, this allows you to connect to the data, query them, and then load them to the database, but to any program that you are writing. But it needs you to be familiar with coding. It's not public. We have not talked about it through in our documentation. And the reason is that, as you probably know, is that if you that can put a heavy load on our servers, querying large amounts of data. We are talking about sometimes like hundreds of millions of records. So we only work with, we provide access to researchers on case-by-case basis. So we give them with an API key which they can use to query the data and so on. And the fourth one is that there are some integrations through our website, the Kibana case that Nate mentioned, which gives you a data visualization interface, very similar to Tableau, that you can use to visualize the data just through their user interface, or you can, if you're familiar with D3 for visualization or Vega, it's a visualization grammar, you can write the specification of your graph, and then it basically queries the data and plots them based on that specification. So, well, I probably should have had an intro slide here, so you don't have to look at these GPS visualizations while I'm talking about. But well, here, this is the first example of it. If you go to the website here, we don't have enough from our study to visualize the data, but you can just go to the sample studies here and select this physical activity sample study and go to sensor data.
Mohammed, are those sample studies, when they log in, do they have to go to their profile to enable those? Or
No, they are enabled by default, unless they have gone to their profile and disabled it.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So you can access, for example, geolocation data. So this would be, for example, I can select, for example, user 231. Like if you remember when we were looking at the adherence, user 231 hasn't uploaded data for a while. I think he got bored of the system after a couple of years. So you can see that the last data we had was June 2017, and there hasn't been any data after that. That's why all of the dates that I choose is before June 2017. So here I go to geolocation, and for this participant, I select, say, date that March 21st. Where is it? Okay. To say March 28th. Apply. Yeah, so you can see the data in form of a heat map here. You can zoom in the path that's taken and so on. You can have for more than one participant. So for example, here I can say add user 1 as well. Well, apparently user 1 didn't have any data during that period because it's still focused on.
How will they be distinguished in here?
Sorry?
How will they be distinguished if there are more than one user on the same map?
They won't be. So,
Oh,
for example, you want to see that what is the one place that most of your participants visiting
Okay,
often.
okay.
The data will be combined here
Okay.
in this map. There is very little flexibility in these visualizations. I just quickly go through them. We mostly can focus on the other tool. In the other tool, there are ways to filter the data and so on. You can also go with the trajectory as well. Like, for example, if I pick, say, February 15th, I can say show me a temporal graph. Yeah, you can see, for example, from midnight here, the participant just leaves a bit late. That's the advantage of working in university. So you can leave at 10 a.m. and then go to school and yeah, but then you have to come back home late as well. Yeah, okay, you come home late. So that's the other way that you can plot the data and look at it. So the other one is with survey responses. If I click on responses here, I can select same participant 231, and for example, survey 240. Which one was that? That had the 246 physical activity barriers. If I press go, I chose this survey because it has a lot of media as well, images and so on. You could choose anything else instead. For example, this is one of the images they have loaded. They have uploaded as an answer. The internet is a bit slow here, and the image is well a bit.
That was a barrier to physical activity.
Yes, that's what they have reported as a barrier to physical activity. You can switch to different photos here that they have uploaded. Yeah, you can scroll through this, and there's
some
some.
of audio associated with them.
Graffiti suggests possible. Graffiti suggests possible safety problems along the running.
Yeah, okay. So the other one is that you can also plot the survey responses on a map. You can choose the same participant here.
So because you had that capture location when you submit the answer?
Yes, if you choose capture location, then you can plot them on the map here, exactly. Here I say, for example, participant 231, the same. If I press go. Yeah, it says 94 of these responses didn't have any location data, so they're filtered here, but you can access them through the survey responses. Please check survey responses to see all responses.
Each of
Here,
those is a cluster.
yeah, so you've responded to some surveys here as well.
Probably sidewalk.
Yeah, basically you can just see the data this way.
So each point is one person?
These are the responses. So each point is a response, is one response.
It could
So
be by the same person.
whichever you choose here, yes. Like for example, if I could choose one as well and press go, and then this should show some responses. I have to zoom out for that.
So as you zoom out, it clusters them,
Yes.
and you can click on them to sort of disaggregate.
Yeah, so for example, these two here around Toronto is the different participant. Yeah. While this around Washington is a different person. So these are a couple of them that you can access through the website. You can also export the data. So if it's survey responses, you can export it as CSV or JSON. Here in the site link here. So if you for example select participants, a given survey, I can say all participants. You can download as CSV or download as JSON. That gives you the responses here. Okay, yeah, it opened it here. Yes. You can see that, for example, question content was, can you photograph this barrier? It was an image that was responded at this time and this is the URL to the image, and also, and the rest of the details for that. Same that you can download as CSV as well. If it's GPS data, you can download as CSV. Basically, any sort type of data you can download as CSV. But if it's GPS and if it's Bluetooth-based data, it's different. You can, for GPS, you can also use KML, and for Bluetooth, you can use GEXF, that you can open it in Gephi if you're familiar with that. I can go to data export here, raw data download here. For the sensor data, you have to go to raw data download to download them. For accelerometer and motion sensor data, you only can download it per month. And the reason is that it's even per month, sometimes it's between 5 to 10 million records. And at some point, it doesn't make sense to have a file with that many records. Here I select, for example, I was going to select GPS and I want to download as, for example, KML, say, for example, from 2018, February. If I press go, it gives me a KML file that I can open it in Google Earth. Where is the data here again? Yes.
I have a question that strays a little bit from visualization.
Yes.
A lot. Yeah, let me know if this is quote for. Earlier we were talking a bit about the cognitive tests.
Yes.
And I'm wondering about the ability to capture device sensor data during the testing.
Yeah, like we're working on that. The other one, one of the other items that I didn't mention during surveys is actually doing tasks. For example, you can ask participant to hold the phone steadily on their hand and walk for 2 minutes. And during that 2 minutes, you can collect sensor data with the maximum rate possible. You can collect motion sensor data, and then so for example, you can use that analysis. So during that time, you will have more intense data collection while the participant is engaged in doing a specific task.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly that one.
Wonderful. Yeah, it got me thinking about it, especially when you're talking about these data export formats. Presumably, when you export from a survey, you might have the performance and those data collects in
Yeah.
time series.
Yeah, exactly. That's actually very, very helpful. And we haven't had any study yet to use that. That's why we haven't prioritized it. But it's exactly our plan, because I know that there are a lot of studies can be done using this approach here. So for example, this is the KML data. Yes?
How often does the synchronization happen between the device and
The phone tries to do it once an hour. But it depends on a lot of different factors. Depends on how often, like how much battery is left. If there's very little battery left on the phone postpones the data upload. If you have chosen to rapid data upload, the data is uploaded as soon as it's collected. If you have chosen if the participant chooses to upload via Wi-Fi only and they're not connected, no data upload happens.
Basically the tuning parameters.
Yeah, they can do some control. Yeah.
Maybe I'll just say that if you have your phone, you could see in the upper left.
Oh, I can show it here.
Yeah, sure.
On the simulator.
There's a menu, and not only can you use that to pause your data collection, but you can also use it to set with your settings. For example, do you allow it to upload with Wi-Fi, or do you restrict it to Wi-Fi, or do you allow it with cell data, or does it allow for rapid upload, which would mean the data is being recorded more frequently?
Yeah, so they can do basically, they have these 3 switches: upload via Wi-Fi only, upload via charging only, and whether to do rapid upload or not. They can tweak these ones, and there are some considerations that the app takes into account before uploading the data.
Is there any study-specific setting of the I think for a study you can say, do you want to restrict it to Wi-Fi upload?
Yeah, but the way it works, if you're part of more than one study, it takes the most restrictive. So if you say Wi-Fi only, I believe that's how it works. I have to check. If one says Wi-Fi only, the other one says Wi-Fi or data plan, it uses Wi-Fi or data plan for all the studies.
And
so
for rapid upload, can you say that as part of the study settings?
No, you can't.
No, you have to say it when you enroll the user.
Yes. So yeah, so this is the KML data that you can open it in Google Maps, Google Earth, and look at the data. The same way with Bluetooth beacons, the Bluetooth data as well. But with Bluetooth data, if I choose GXF, well, it's not very visible here. I'm not sure if it's visible on your end. It disables these three because it doesn't make sure to download a network data for only one participant. So it just downloads it for only participants or for participants and other nodes visited. So the third one that also is through the website is if you use Kibana combination with Vega, and you can plot a lot of different types of visualizations there. We'll go through some of them here. Where is the website here? Okay. I go to project here and click on Kibana, the last option. This is an open source data visualization tool that is offers, if you're familiar with Tableau or other business intelligence tools, offers a lot of similar functionalities. So when you come here,
This is an Apache project.
This is an Apache project,
It's an
yes.
open source.
It's an open source Apache project. So you have first you have some workspaces that your workspace, if you click here on your workspace either is your private workspace, whatever, you can create any visualization you want in your private workspace and you can play with it. If you want to share it with other members of your research team, you can go to the study, like for example, there are quite a few studies here, like I can go to 422. Oh, I'm not part of 422, I don't know, I have to check why it's
73.
yeah, for example, study 73 because sample study is not included here. So I do most of them here on my personal one. Yeah. So you can, whatever you create in your workspace, it just can be shared with everyone else in your workspace. So for example, if I create a graph and it appears as part of 422, anyone else, each of you that are also part of study 422, you can access that as well. Here you can look at the raw data if you want to just basically discover the data. For example, here I can say, show me the survey, for example, survey responses. I can choose the table for survey responses for user ID 1. User ID is 1. This is set for last 15 minutes. I can say show for the last 7 days. You can see that it shows how much survey responses I've been receiving. I can also pick to only show question content. If I find it here, Q content, yes, here. And answer. Answer ID, location, Q type, record time, answer, study ID, schedule time, Q ID, answer ID maybe. Sorry, I have to search here. There are quite a few fields. Yeah, answer content, that one in the top. So you can see, for example, at 8:46, the question was, did you feel sick last week? And the response was no. Did you experience coughing or wheezing last week? The answer is no, and so on. You can scroll through the data and look at this. You can also basically create any other graph here. Like if I just come here and I say I want to, in the visualization tab, I can press plus here to create a new visualization, and I can say I want to create a coordinate map based on GPS data, for example. And here first I say that I want the data to be for user ID 1 again. And I can say I want to use geo-coordinates, geo-hash, based on field of location. What metric and bucket means is basically the terminology that they use in Kibana for data visualization. There's a lot of documentation and YouTube videos that talks about how visualization in Kibana works. You can just check those, but It's also pretty, well, you can play around with that as well and see how it plots the data. Here I simply say that, yeah, I want to create a, like basically what I did here, if I, if I cancel that, I only have one option to select here. That's why I quickly go through it. It says, select the bucket type. I said, well, there's only one option anyway, geo coordinates. Aggregation, I want to aggregate on geohash. And the field that I want to use is the location field. If I press play, it's supposed to plot this. I also probably want to, if I come to options, I can also select to use heat map. Yeah, now I can zoom in on this field. Yeah, you can see the heat map of the GPS data collected for the past 7 days. So I can save any of these visualizations I'm creating here. I can save this, for example, as geo heat map. So this is one of my visualizations that I saved. You can create more visualizations here. You can, if you go to visualize, you can put together a few more based on whichever of these types that you want to select. And you can put together to create a dashboard. Like for example, here is just already a dashboard that I already had created. I can modify this, press edit here, and I can say I want to add on top here. I can press add and select this geo hash map visualization that I just, geo heat map that I just created in this spot. Add the new visualization. Oh, sorry. I think it's already added here. Yes, it added our visualization down here. And I can just extend it to here. And you can see I have some time series data that I have created before and some location data, and it just plots all of those data together. One thing I wanted to explain is that we talked about the beacon data and how we can trigger surveys based on that. I'm just going to focus on data, for example, from say July 11th to July 11th. So June 11th to June 11th, just that one day. You can see here that, for example, I wanted the surveys to be triggered when the beacon is in proximity. The graph on the left, this one, shows the number of beacons that the participant has seen, and the right shows the surveys that are triggered. You can see that at around 12 p.m., the participant was in the proximity of beacon for around 2 hours, and at 2 p.m. here in this graph, the survey is triggered. Because the survey was set to trigger after 2 hours being in proximity with the beacon. So here you can see that I've been in proximity for almost 2 hours, and on this one I got the survey. And the same, you can do the same inference on the top graph as well. So you can use this time series data to see when do you have the Bluetooth beacons visited and whether a survey is triggered on that or not. There is a detailed article on the website that talks about how you can create them, how you have to create each of these single graphs, how you have to program your beacons, how you have to create each of these graphs, how you can put all 6 of them together, or if there's more for your study. So this is one example of it. Any questions so far before I close this?
So again, when you create these things, you can add to dashboards, and then you can share the dashboards with others.
Yes, yeah. And one, the other visualization you can create is based on the beacon data, for example, but this is a custom code written with Vega. Vega is also a data visualization grammar that there is a fair bit of documentation about it online that talks about how you can put this JSON code to create this graph. But we do have this, of course, we can share it. But for example, if I say it has shown me all the Bluetooth beacon data for this participant for the past 7 days, This is the network graph that it plots based on the beacon data. Or the other one is based on the screen events. I want to set it to study 422, and also which is the current study, and I also can say only for 2018 from today is 7 July 10th at 12 till 10th at 15. I'm basically specifying the requirements here. Like I want data to be collected from, to be fetched from July 10th at noon to July 10th at 3 p.m. for a study 422 when they turn on their screen. So the state of the screen is true, so the screen is just turned on. And I can say that create a tick bar for me. This is also in Vega specification, where x-axis is temporal and y-axis is ordinal. And y-axis is the user ID, and x-axis is time. If I plot it, we don't have any data. So, yeah. Sorry?
Typo at line 15.
Typo in line 15.
Line 15. Oh yeah, no, it's it says that there's a typo here, but there's actually no, because for some reason their syntax highlighter has a problem here that thinks there's a typo. If I no, this is a valid JSON format actually. Yeah. If I copy it here and go, for example, to JSON editor online. Yeah, I can. I've validated it a couple of times. You can see that I can. Yeah, it's valid JSON here.
Oh, you put February instead of July.
Oh yes. Oh, so that's what you mean the typo.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I thought you mean the typo because of this one, because it also detects a typo around here. That's the problem of their highlighter. The JSON is valid though. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. So let me plot this. Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good catch. Yeah. So you can see that, for example, participant 5636, these are the times that this participant has turned on their phone. And you can see that in x-axis there is there's a time here. What basically this does is that if you can go through the specification of Vega, but I will quickly go through it at what it says. It says there is a title for it, times the user has checked their phone. That's the title of the graph. The data for this is defined here. What it says is that it should work on the index or the database of the screen state, and it should make a query where the record time is within this range, the study ID is 422, and the participant has turned on their screen. This is basically the query that you make on the data. You can say, also have said that return the first 10,000 records and sort by record time. So that's how I have sorted the data as well. And in the data that it returns, I say you have to start reading from hits.hits. That's basically the format of the JSON. If you look at the return of this query, this executes this query, the body, whatever is written in the body, against Elasticsearch. It's just a data storage system, and returns you a JSON object. Within that JSON object, there is a hierarchy that first there is hits, and then there's under that is also hits, and then under that there is the data. This is just a specification of how Elasticsearch works. Why there's hits and under that there's hits, it's just their format. So I say go under hits.hits and read the data from there. And then use tick as the mark, and for the encoding, use underscore source.record time as the field for x-axis, which is the temporal, and of type temporal for time, and the title is X and the format is this. I can convert it to ordinal. I'm not sure how it works by convert it to ordinal, if it even works or not. Yes, you can see it shows all these Unix timestamps here as the ordinal. And for y-axis, I have said that the type is ordinal and the title is user, and the field for that is user ID. Just plots this. and some extra configuration, like for example, the thickness of the of each thick here. If I plot this back, you can see that's the graph that you get. So you can save this. The other example is that if you want to, for example, create steps per day, like a pedometer, for example, you can see I've written the same thing, but there is an aggregation, because the way that pedometer works is that it captures the number of steps taken at every, like for example, 5 minutes. You want to aggregate it over day, so see how many steps taken per day. So you get that data, you run the same query for the data field for the body from here starting to, yeah, it's a bit longer, the query for that. But you basically define the aggregation over the record time, and the interval is day, you want to aggregate over day. And then the query for that would be anything that's, the record time is larger than this, the user ID is 1, and the study's ID is 73. The rest is pretty much the same. It's bar graph that has x-axis equals to this and so on. I can change it, for example, to a line graph. If I plot it, it would show a. So one thing that you can do is that you can actually share these visualizations with others, including participants. If you press share here, I can just, it gives me one URL here. You can see it's embedded iframe here. I can just select this URL. Let me see how I can select it. No? Okay. I can open it in this new tab page. Of course, because it's iframe, I just have to cut the end of it and the beginning a bit of this, so I can get a URL. So the participants will only see the visualization and none of the other stuff around it. And this is of course shown in a desktop. If I wanted to show it to you on a phone, that's how it would look like on their phone. So you can tie this to one of the survey buttons.
On a sort of overall level, data for these studies is owned by participants. In some studies, if I'm not mistaken, participants have the right to go back and retroactively delete data for themselves.
Usually for all of the IRBs, we specify that participants have this access, and we actually do give participants this access to delete their data.
So
Themselves?
retroactively.
Yes, themselves.
Yes. As I had mentioned, there's also the recourse participants have in pausing data collection at any point. They can press a button to stop it for a defined amount of time. So participants do own data. Sometimes that data is provided back to them. In some studies, we've provided it back to the community on the basis of aggregated reports or anonymized data with ethics oversight. Researchers curate that data. So the data for most studies is stored on Ethica servers. In some cases, teams have sought to store that data in their own premises. And there's technical implications for that in the sense of needing to have the infrastructure and the support staff needed to maintain that infrastructure. For example, a NoSQL database in the form of Cassandra, etc. But data that is collected and stored is done so in an encrypted fashion on the phone while it's transmitted, and subsequently is stored in databases which are not themselves accessible via the web, but are stored on password-protected servers. And the data ownership issue is one which also gets into the guarantees given to participants with respect to privacy. So there are cases where, for privacy considerations, we for example, guarantee participants in perpetuity that we will not publish data at an individual level without their consent. In other times, for some of the studies, participants undergo a tiered level of recruitment where some participants elect to have their study data used in a more fulsome fashion, and others restrict how their data can be used to certain purposes. So The data ownership side is one that you're going to want to think about for any studies. We don't have time to go into it in detail, but suffice it to say that it's one that has significant implications for your analysis, for participant recruitment, for your curation of the data, etc. Now, for REBs, or research ethics boards, anonymity is often a point of considerable interest in de-identification. As with many studies, typically while a study is being run, there's a master list that relates a given participant ID on the one hand to contact information for that participant. So if a participant, for example, switches phones, or a participant ceases to answer certain questions, we typically want to reach out to them during the study to inquire as to barriers, how we could help them, make sure to remind them to install the app on their new phone and provide any guidance that they may need for this. And partly because of that, the system does collect an email address and password to join it. But in some cases, participants are guided to provide a fake address, which is not in fact their email address, but instead goes back to the researchers involved. So the researcher may maintain a separate master list which relates this participant contact information is related to this Ethica ID. That master list is maintained during the study, and any problems that come up, the researcher actually takes care of dealing with it. For example, resetting the password for a participant is a classic one. So this issue of anonymization is one of significance. It's one that interacts with the data collected. If what you're collecting is survey responses and step counts, for example, and sleep data, perhaps from a Fitbit, then the anonymization is not very problematic. It's fairly straightforward. One destroys the master list at the completion of the survey, or the study rather, or particular participants' participation in the survey, or the study as a whole. And in that case, one can proceed to confidence that anonymization has been achieved. By contrast, there are other studies which collect, for example, detailed contact information or GPS data, Wi-Fi contact data, where true effective de-identification is harder. And REBs typically will balance, on the one hand, the risks and the dangers, and sometimes there's a commitment by the researchers to scramble that data, for example, scrambling aspects of GPS. In other cases, there's just a commitment to only analyze data in certain ways for the sake of the data analysis. Now, we're approaching 10 minutes before our close here, so I just want to make some remarks on where you can learn more about this system. So we're going to be holding, for those who are interested, 2 events which provide much more detail on this system. So one is a bootcamp and incubator we're holding on August 13th through 17th at our University of Saskatchewan. What's notable here is that this is not only an introduction to the system, but it's an incubator. So by the end of the week, we try to make sure that people go away with a study design that's been designed by contract with TAs and instructors, that's specified, that's been tested, that's been refined based on that testing, and has the necessary tools in place to visualize it. So the incubator component is designed to make sure that everyone goes away from the boot camp with a full tested and complete end-to-end option for conducting this study. That is this August, so it's another 2 months from now, and I welcome anyone who's interested in that. If you have interest in combining the sort of data we collect from smartphones on the one hand with techniques from system science, particularly dynamic modeling, These would be, for example, things like agent-based models, system dynamics models, etc. There's a further event in November that we're running. Much of this focuses on analysis methods, particularly machine learning techniques to bring this data together with simulation, dynamic simulation approaches. But we'll also be talking some about some of the particulars of data collected from smartphones and wearables, in as much as they are combined with dynamic models. And I've provided contact information here for signing up for any of these. If you're interested in finding out more information, I can provide you with URLs. For some reason it didn't come out here, but there's URLs we'll be sure to provide in the PDF for both of these that you can go to and learn more. Those are the prepared material that we have. We have some additional slides that can provide, additional uses of this data, particular examples of case studies where the data collected from these different mechanisms can be used to understand a person's trajectories over time, delineate those generative pathways that I spoke about at the beginning of the entire session. But I figure the priority here is to get any questions answered from the audience. Questions more broadly about the system. So in the final minutes here, can we answer any questions you may have about Ethica or about the types of surveys that are, or studies that are run with Ethica, the types of surveys you can define with it, etc.? So are there any questions?